This week, we will be discussing the difference between assault, aggravated assault, and domestic assault. So, first off, simple assault. What constitutes a simple assault?
Yeah, so a simple assault can happen in three different ways. The first is if bodily injury occurs. Bodily injury can be bruises, scratch marks, anything like that. It can also happen if you place another in fear of imminent bodily injury. Now, the word imminent is important because that indicates there's a temporal component where it has to be imminent, which means very sudden, right there. That's different where if there's a threat of some sort, like if you don't do this, then I'm going to hurt you, that's not imminent. It would be more like if they threw an object at you or if they were charging at you and that fear of injury was imminent, very sudden, very close to happening. And then the third way a simple assault can happen is offensive contact, which is just bodily contact. It can be from your person, it can be from an object. If you throw a phone or an object and it hits them, that's offensive contact, and that doesn't have to result in any sort of bodily injury. Now, simple assault can also turn into domestic assault depending on the relationship between you and the person that has been assaulted. And Dakota's going to talk to you a little bit about what a domestic relationship is.
So a lot of the times, you have your very common domestic relationships that everyone thinks of: boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife. We also have those uncommon relationships. Things like if you live with someone, if you were roommates with them, that is also a domestic relationship under Tennessee law. You're related by blood or adoption. So brother, sister, aunts, uncles, people like that are also covered under the domestic definition of what a domestic relationship is. So if an assault's committed against one of those people or the category of people, you could be charged under the domestic assault statute. There are also times where a simple assault can turn into a felony level assault. Andrew, do you want to talk about those?
Yeah, so when you're dealing with an aggravated assault, is you're dealing with a simple assault like Emily and Dakota have talked about, but you're dealing with different elements. So now instead of just injury or fear of injury, we're talking about serious bodily injury, which we're not talking about bruises and scrapes anymore. We're talking about broken bones and other things that would require medical attention or would leave a lasting impact on somebody or interfere with some portion of their life. It can also involve the use or display of a deadly weapon, firearms, knives, instruments that are capable of causing, lasting injury on somebody. And so now, instead of this 11-month and 29-day sentence on a misdemeanor, we're talking about 3 to 6 years on a felony. And additionally, is the other part of it is strangulation. Is Tennessee's got a very broad aggravated assault statute on strangulation. It does not require that you choked a person unconscious, that you did it for any certain period of time, that you left any bruises. Nothing. It's just that if the person testifies that you impeded their breathing or normal circulation. Now, like I said, generally it's going to be a C felony, 3 to 6 years in prison or on probation. It is diversion eligible. However, there is a B felony level if the victim is pregnant that came into law, I believe, in 2024. And you want to talk about defenses?
Yeah, so there's a lot of defenses, whether it's assault, domestic assault, aggravated assault. Like Emily mentioned, as far as fear of imminent bodily injury, requires both fear and that is imminent. So we look at the response of the alleged victim in relation or response to what the accused does, right? So if we have the accused who allegedly caused this person to fear that they had a gun on them or a knife to increase it to an aggravated assault, but in response to seeing that gun, the victim still charges towards the defendant. Or, as the defendant is walking in the opposite direction, they're chasing after them. That cuts against the fact that they were actually in fear of any type of bodily injury or in fear of that gun, because why would they be chasing after them? Same thing with, as far as imminent, like Emily mentioned, is there a reason to believe that this is impending on them within moments? And so statements like, if you do not do, X, then I will come back to your house and, assault you. That is not imminent because there is a modifier that says, if you do this, then I will respond. So there's a lot of defenses as far as that goes. As far as bodily injury or serious bodily injury, well, how does the state prove that serious bodily injury? They usually need medical proof. There's sometimes arguments, depending on what that injury is, as to allege that it is just a simple injury rather than a serious bodily injury. There's also many defenses in relation to what a reasonable person would believe. So Emily mentioned the third type of assault is offensive contact. Well, for it to be offensive contact, it's based on what the reasonable person would believe is offensive. So if a reasonable person would not believe it's offensive for me to, push Andrew in response to something he says to me, it might not be offensive. But if I do it out of nowhere without anything that Andrew did to cause me to be offensive towards him, sorry, Andrew. But if you spit on someone, for example, most people don't want to be spat on. I mean, that is offensive contact to the reasonable person in the vast majority of cases. And so when we talk about assault, domestic assaults, aggravated assaults, at the end of the day, every case is different. It depends on the facts, and it depends on what you can convince a jury, or what the state would have to convince a jury to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. And so we would try to argue that a specific element was not met by the state. As far as the offenses too, let's talk about the differences in punishment. I think is important as well. So simple assault and domestic assault. Dakota, you talked about the difference as far as the elements go based on their relationship. Is there any additional consequences to a domestic that a normal assault does not have?
Yes, so a domestic assault is still punishable by the 11 months, 29 days, a misdemeanor for the simple assault, but there are lifelong punishments that could be in effect. Recently this year, the legislature passed a domestic violence registry. So if you've been convicted of a domestic assault and you're convicted of a subsequent domestic assault, you have to register yourself on that registry. There's also a loss of firearms for a lifetime when someone is convicted of a domestic assault.
Yeah. That's the big ones. There's also, if it's a second or third offense for domestic, in addition to the registry, there's sometimes additional mandatory jail time as well. So there's a lot of factors that go into it. And then we talked about the 3 to 6 years. That could also be enhanced significantly depending on your history.
Yeah, 3 to 6 years is a range 1 offender, meaning that you have no criminal history, and that's obviously for the C felony. That means a felony conviction where you can potentially go to prison. Now, if you do have criminal history, that can be an enhanced, go from 3 to 6 to 6 to 12. Or if it's the B felony version, if the victim is pregnant, that 8 to 12 becomes 12 to 20, and that is a mandatory prison sentence. So obviously, it's very important to get on top of the case and begin to establish the defenses like Brandon talked about.